a simple lemon tart, and a web of lies. Welcome to Maple Mysteries. I am your host, Raymond. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below. Your messages always bring a smile. Thank you. Let's dive in.
It started, as many of our better fiascos do, with a knock on the front door at precisely the wrong moment, 10 minutes before lunch. Fritz was in the kitchen, singing to the sauce in low, reverent German, and Wolfe was planted in his chair with the eyes of a man who had already mentally tasted the truffled eggs waiting behind that door. I had just picked up the Gazette, angling to see if the crossword might tempt Wolfe into speech, when the doorbell dragged me off the couch. The woman on the stoop was not typical brownstone fare. For one thing, she was smiling, not nervously or politely, but like she had already won something. She was tall, silver-haired in a sleek bob, and wore a cream coat that probably cost more than my monthly fee. She didn't wait for an invitation. She breezed in like a souffle on a spring morning, crisp and warm and full of air. "I'm Elise Varden," she said, unbuttoning her coat and glancing around with the curiosity of a buyer at an open house. "And you must be Archie Goodwin. You look exactly how I imagined you'd look." "You don't say." I closed the door behind her, resisting the impulse to glance at the clock. Fritz's risotto wasn't going to stay dreamy forever. "And what brings you to our charming little citadel of domestic peace?" She smiled again, but it had angles now. A lie. One very small lie, told with citrus zest. That got me. "Lady, unless you're talking about a lemon tart with a shady alibi, I'll need more." She didn't explain. She just tilted her head toward Wolfe's office. "Is he in?" "I'd like to speak to Mr. Wolfe. It's urgent. And yes, I'll pay his fee." That last part unfurled like a banner. I gave her a half smile and gestured toward the office. "You're in." Luck. He hasn't decided to move to Bhutan yet. Let's see if he bites. I led her in. Wolfe was in his chair, of course, looking like a brick wall in brown silk. His eyes flicked to her, then to me, then back to her, as if we were variations of a very unappetizing theme. "This is Elise Varden," I said. "She claims she's got a lemon-flavored lie to serve." He didn't even blink. "Miss Varden, sit. Explain." She did, elegantly. 3 days ago, I hosted a small tasting luncheon at my home. 7 people total, including myself. A casual affair, friends, associates. I served a veal roulade with preserved lemon zest. The zest was prepared by my chef, Sandro, who has been with me for 9 years. Wolfe let out a slow breath. He was no fan of social niceties, and a veal story before lunch ranked high on his list of sins. "What is your difficulty?" he said. She leaned forward. "Yesterday I received an anonymous note. It accused one of my guests by implication, not name, of having sabotaged the food. Not to poison, but to embarrass. According to the note, the lemon zest was tampered with, swapped for a blend mixed with baking soda and powdered ginger. The taste was slightly wrong, enough to humiliate Sandro if he noticed. He didn't." "You received this note?" Wolfe asked. "Yes." She reached into her purse, produced a folded envelope, and passed it to me. I took it to Wolfe, who opened it with the elegance of someone who resents being made to handle paper. He read it twice. "It says," he murmured, "that your chef is a blind fool, and that the lie of the lemon will show its rot in time." Rather purple. "I agree," Elise said, "but the thing is, someone did tamper with the zest." I checked. The preserved lemon jar in my pantry was switched. The original batch is gone. I want to know who did it and why. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Why not go to the police?" she chuckled. Because it's not a crime, it's a message, a personal one. I think it's connected to something much older, and if I'm right, someone is warning me. I watched Wolfe's face. He didn't frown or twitch, but something in him paused, the kind of pause that meant he was already fitting puzzle pieces behind those orchid-fed eyes. "Name the guests," he said. She did, and I took them down. Thurston Lyle, former wine critic now, a lifestyle columnist. Margot Vance, Elise's business partner in a luxury food venture. Jonas Keene, her estate manager, ex-army, sharp as flint. Sophie Rilke, a pastry chef with a short temper and a long memory. Roderick Ames, a quiet man who teaches culinary history. Gillian Trask, Elise's niece, eager, maybe too eager, all present at the luncheon, all presumably capable of kitchen mischief. Wolfe said, "You mentioned something older." She nodded. 10 years ago, I was involved in a small scandal, a cover-up, nothing that made the papers. But if this is connected, then someone from that group knows what I did. That got Wolfe's full attention, not because of the threat, but because the sanctity of taste had been violated. "I will take your case," Wolfe said, shocking us both. "But I will not leave this house, nor tolerate further interruptions of my meals. Archie will handle the inquiries." "Of course," she said, standing. "I trust you'll be discreet." Wolfe looked at her like she'd suggested he start wearing sandals. "I am never anything else," he said. After she left, I turned to him. "You took that faster than a fork to polenta. Why?" He reached for the envelope again and tapped it with one thick finger. "Because this isn't about food. It's about vengeance. And whoever wrote this believes the lie began a long time ago. I propose we find the truth before someone decides a little ginger powder isn't enough." I gave him a look. "You think it's going to escalate?" He closed his eyes. "I think," he said, "that someone is preparing a more bitter course." It took Wolfe exactly 40 minutes after Elise Varden's departure to summon me back into the office, which was just long enough for Fritz to serve the veal dish Elise had so eloquently ruined for me. As I stabbed through lunch, Wolfe was silent, chewing with the reverent, rhythmic focus of a man navigating his highest religious rite. I didn't interrupt, though I had a dozen questions queued up behind my molars. I knew the rules. Don't speak during the meal, and don't expect Wolfe to speak until he's ready to put his knife down and the world back together in his head. At 2045, he buzzed me. I set aside my paper and the half-finished crossword and marched back in, notebook ready. "Archie," he said without looking up, "I want all 6 of them here, tomorrow afternoon, 3 o'clock. That was Wolfe, straight to the climax while skipping the overture. "You mean the suspects Elise Varden listed? You haven't even sniffed them yet." He opened his eyes. The lemon zest was not merely replaced, it was switched in. A way designed to humiliate the chef subtly, suggesting a knowledge of flavor nuance and emotional leverage. That eliminates pranksters and implicates intent. "So you think this wasn't a joke gone stale?" "I think," he said, "someone is sending a layered message. To understand it, I must see the recipients, assemble them. Elise must be present. Her reactions will be instructive." I sat down, because this was clearly not going to be a short session. "You want all 6 suspects, including her niece and the pastry chef with a vendetta, crammed into your office for an impromptu reunion? That'll go over well." "I will not interrogate them," Wolfe said, folding his hands. "Not yet. Tomorrow is merely a casual discussion. You will invite them as a favor to Miss Varden, who seeks closure on a minor culinary mishap. Make it sound innocuous. Innocuous as a rattlesnake in a hamper, I muttered. What about today? You will begin with Mr. Lyle. He lives on West End Avenue. The man is a critic turned columnist. He will talk. Learn who he watched at the luncheon, what was said, and what Elise may have said that she did not repeat to us. Got it? Then he closed his eyes again. Then you will find the pastry chef, Sophie Rilke. She has reason to dislike Elise, and I want to know how deep that vein runs. Which was Wolfe? Speak for, dig until you strike something that leaks motive. By 3030, I was in a cab, West End bound. Thurston Lyle's building had the kind of doorman who sizes you up based on shoe polish and pocket square alignment. I gave him the look that said I had an appointment he didn't know about and probably didn't want to interrupt. 10 minutes later, I was ushered into Lyle's apartment, which looked like it had been staged for a magazine spread titled Decadent Regret Books, Bottles, and Bronze Sculpture, all arranged just artlessly enough to look natural. Lyle was thin, graying, with the dried cheekbones of a man who had tasted too many wines and not enough joy. He poured himself a vermouth and didn't offer me one. Elise sent you? He said, not hiding the suspicion. She asked Mr. Wolfe to look into the note, I said. It struck her as more than a prank. His lips curved. Of course it did. Elise has always believed the world revolves around secrets aimed at her. Does it? He laughed, brittle and nasal. Only the petty ones. That luncheon was absurd. Do you know what she called it? A citrus celebration. We had candied lemon ricotta bites, veal with zest. You'd think she was launching a lemon cult. Was the food tampered with? He shrugged. I thought the zest was off, too bitter. But I assumed Sandro had gone overboard. I didn't think sabotage. What are we, jealous teenagers? Were any of the guests upset during the luncheon? He took a sip of his drink, gazing over the rim. Sophie Rilke was tight-lipped. But then she always is when Elise is around. They had a blow-up years ago, something about a recipe. Elise borrowed and passed off as her own in one of her books. Sophie swore it was theft. I wasn't there, but you could feel the chill when they greeted each other. And the others? He sniffed. Jonas Keene is a clenched fist in a suit, never speaks unless necessary. Gillian is too eager to please. And Roderick Ames, well, he might as well be wallpaper. He said 3 words all afternoon, and one of them was salt. That aligned with Elise's list. Anything else stand out? Lyle hesitated, then added, Elise toasted something. At the end, she said, to correcting old wrongs with new flavors. Sounded innocuous. But the way she looked at each of us, one by one, there was a charge. Like she expected someone to flinch. I noted it, thanked him, and got out. Wolfe had been right. This wasn't about the food. By 5015, I was standing in a sugar-dusted kitchen in the East 70s, where Sophie Rilke ran her bakery. She didn't look pleased to see me. She was in her mid-40s, with flour on her apron and a gaze like a carving knife. Elise. Varden, I began, and she immediately rolled her eyes. If this is about the luncheon, she said, tell her I wasn't impressed. It's about the zest. Someone tampered with it. She paused. Good. Good. I hope she chokes on her brand image, Sophie snapped. She stole my recipe. 12 years ago. Lemon lavender tart with basil creme. She published it with no credit, claimed she dreamed it. She didn't dream anything except how to sleep with editors. Did you mess with her luncheon? No. I wouldn't risk jail over Elise Varden. But if someone else finally decided to cut her ego down to size, I'd send flowers. I filed that under motive with a capital M. As I left, she called after me. Ask her where she got the idea for correcting old wrongs. That was my phrase. I said it, once, right to her face. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant room. I waited until he emerged at 6. She's got enemies, I said. Enemies with vocabularies. Wolfe grunted and lowered himself into his chair. Then we proceed. Tomorrow the truths will begin to unpeel. And with that he closed his eyes, satisfied, smug, and full of veal. Bye. The time 3 o'clock rolled around the next day. The brownstone had been stripped of all distractions. Fritz retreated to the kitchen with the precision of a man preparing for war, and Theodore shut the door to the plant rooms with a faint thud that I could practically hear all the way. From the front hall, Wolfe's office had been freshly aired and the globe dusted, partially because I told Fritz to do it, and partially because Wolfe's instincts knew this one was going to ripple past the first splash. The first to arrive was Gillian Trask, Elise's niece. She was 10 minutes early and dressed like someone trying to look both grown-up and harmless, navy blouse, hair in a twist, earrings just shy of expensive. She wrung her hands until I gave her a scotch, and then she stopped. But only physically. "Is Aunt Elise upset?" she asked, settling into the red chair near Wolfe's desk. I told her not to serve veal. She always makes everything about proving something. I gave her a neutral look. You'll have a chance to talk to her. She's due any minute. Wolfe didn't speak, but I could feel the beam of his mind lasering in on her posture, her tone, her nerves. Margot Vance came next, businesslike in a steel gray suit and low heels. She brushed past me with the air of a woman who kept investors waiting on principle. "I hope this doesn't take long," she said. "I've got a shipment being held at customs." Wolfe inclined his head slightly, which from him was practically a bow. "That depends on the clarity of what's said." Roderick Ames and Jonas Keene arrived within minutes of each other. Roderick was pale, balding, and shaped like a neglected footstool. He spoke softly and only when spoken to. Jonas was harder to read. Trim, ramrod posture, blazer over a turtleneck, hands behind his back, like he was expecting a court-martial. He acknowledged everyone with a nod and nothing more. Sophie Roca walked in without knocking, glanced once around the room, and folded her arms like she was prepared to dislike every square inch of it. She met Elise's gaze with an expression carved out of stone and lemon rind. Thurston Lyle was last. He strolled in like he owned the place and proceeded to position himself at an angle that let him watch everybody without turning his head. I made a note to frisk his apartment later for hidden cameras. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it. Wolfe took his time. His eyes moved from face to face with measured disinterest. The silence thickened until it gained weight. "I have asked you here," he began, "because Miss Varden has brought to me a concern, trivial on its surface, but of potential consequence. During a luncheon held at her home, one of the dishes was tampered with. The preserved lemon zest in the veal roulade was substituted with a concoction of baking soda and ginger. There was a twitch from Gillian, but she suppressed it. Sophie did not. "And we're all suspects in culinary sabotage," she said dryly. "You are," Wolfe said, "participants in an event that someone saw fit to manipulate." Miss Varden received a note afterward, anonymous, referring to the tampering as a lies and referencing rot in time. He let that hang there. Margot frowned. "That sounds like a threat." "It is," Wolfe said, "but veiled and calculated, not designed to injure the body, but to provoke a reckoning. I intend to understand why." Elise leaned forward slightly. "I know it was someone in this room, and I No, it's connected to the past. Not just the luncheon, the phrasing, the method. It's personal. Jonas Keene spoke, his voice like gravel in silk. What kind of past, Elise? That's the part you conveniently never share. Wolfe gestured with one hand. Now we approach the marrow. The sabotage was not the beginning. It was an echo. I suggest we explore what it echoes. A beat. Roderick coughed quietly. I thought it was just odd-tasting veal. I didn't know there was a crime. Nor is there yet, Wolfe said, but a pattern is forming. Miss Rilke, you had a prior grievance. I had a theft, she said, a tart recipe. Elise lifted it, rebranded it, and published it as hers. No apology, no credit. Elise's nostrils flared. I've addressed that before. It wasn't theft, it was inspiration. The tart you're referring to was a variation. Then why did you use my phrase in your toast? Sophie shot back. Correcting old wrongs with new flavors. You said it verbatim. That got everyone's attention. Lyle murmured, I thought that line felt charged. Wolfe's voice was a quiet strike. So did I. Gillian's eyes flicked toward Elise, then down. Again. Margot cleared her throat. Look, Elise and I have had our share of differences. But sabotage? Really? Let's not pretend you weren't furious about the trademark fight, Elise snapped. You thought I left you to take the fall. I did take the fall, Margot said sharply. You claimed ignorance while I got the fine. If anyone has a grudge, it's me. Wolfe allowed it to unfold. He sat back, his gaze unreadable. Mr. Keene, he said after a moment, what's your history with Miss Varden? Jonas's jaw flexed. I served under her father. In the military. When he passed, she hired me to manage her estate. I've done it for 6 years. I don't meddle in lemon zest. But you observe, Wolfe said. You see who enters the pantry, who lingers near the kitchen. Jonas gave a small nod. Gillian was in the kitchen after everyone had gone to the parlor. Said she forgot her phone. Gillian flushed. I did. Why would I mess with food? I loved Sandro's cooking. That isn't the question, Wolfe said. The question is, what would you do to protect your aunt? A silence hit the room like a dropped tray. Elise turned. Gillian? But Gillian shook her head. No, I didn't do anything. I didn't touch the food. I only meant I saw the note, okay? It was lying on her desk the next morning. I read it. I thought someone was finally going to expose what happened 10 years ago. Wolfe's eyebrows lifted by a fraction. What happened? He asked. Gillian looked at Elise, then down. I can't, Wolfe spoke calmly. You may find you must. I intend to discover the truth. Whether I am told it now or deduce it later will only affect the ease of the journey. I watched Gillian's lip tremble for a moment. Then she looked up directly at Elise. You said it was an accident, but you never apologized. You left someone else to take the fall, and now someone's angry enough to come after you, one course at a time. Elise's face went still. I didn't think it would come back, she said softly. Wolfe's voice cut through the tension like a wire. Then you miscalculated. He looked at me. Archie, tomorrow, find out what happened 10 years ago and who paid the price. I nodded, the room still thick with the aftershock. The zest might have been bitter, but the past, that was arsenic and lemon rind. After the guests filed out, some fuming, some frazzled, one or two pretending to be utterly unfazed. Wolfe stayed rooted in his chair like a monarch observing the retreat of lesser nobles. I waited until the front door clicked shut behind Thurston Lyle before I finally said what we were both thinking. So, something happened 10 years ago, I began, and now it's coming back like a soufflé with a grudge. Wolfe closed his eyes. You will begin with Margot Vance. She and Elise were business partners. Their history is professional, which means their betrayal, if there was one, would have had both financial and reputational consequence. I stood. Vance first, then, you will also revisit Ms. Trask. She knows more than she admitted. Her desire to protect Elise is muddled with resentment. She is young, impulsive, and has access to the pantry. And the others, I asked? He didn't. Open his eyes. One thread at a time, Archie. Pull carefully. By 10 the next morning, I was waiting in the marble-lined reception area of Vance Gastronomica, Margot's boutique import firm housed in a midtown tower with more glass than personality. A woman in a peach blazer offered me coffee and a forced smile before disappearing behind a door labeled Executive Margot Vance. 5 minutes later, Margot herself appeared, dressed in a dove-gray sheath dress and a look that made it clear she wasn't in the mood for confessions or cappuccino. If this is more about that damn lemon, she said, I'm going to start throwing citrus. You should have thought of that before sitting down to a citrus celebration luncheon hosted by a woman you might have sued. She raised an eyebrow. I didn't sue her. I absorbed the loss. I had no choice. And what, exactly, was the loss? I asked. Be specific. She leaned forward, elbows on her desk. 10 years ago, Elise and I launched a product line, preserved lemons, artisanal salts, infused olive oils. It was all packaged under her name, but I handled the logistics, sourcing, and legal filings. One of our Moroccan suppliers used unverified preservation agents. We got flagged by the FDA. She claimed ignorance and publicly cut ties. I got stuck with the fines and the reputation damage. That must have burned. It did. But Elise was smart. She knew how to pivot. Within a month, she had a new brand and a book deal. I was left to sweep up the mess. And now, I asked, she's successful. I'm solvent, but some people don't forgive easily. You mean Sophie Rilke? Margot laughed coldly. I meant all of them. Rilke, Keene, Lyle, even Roderick Ames. He wrote a scathing piece about her in a culinary journal, then quietly retracted it. I think she bought him off. Did you tamper with the lemon zest? I asked, straight-faced. No, she said, but if someone finally decided to make her taste what she served the rest of us, I'd understand. That gave me enough subtext to wallpaper. A kitchen. I headed back downtown to catch Gillian Trask before she fled to wherever disillusioned nieces go to reevaluate their loyalty. Her apartment was on the Lower East Side, the kind of walk-up where the walls were thin and the rent wasn't. She opened the door in jeans and a worn t-shirt that said, "Need me," which probably got more laughs when she was still in culinary school. Her eyes were puffy. I didn't comment. I know you don't have to talk to me, I said, but it would help both your aunt and Mr. Wolfe if you were a little more forthcoming. She nodded and stepped aside. We sat at a table cluttered with pastry cookbooks, open notebooks, and a bowl of lemons that made me flinch. I didn't sabotage the veal, she said, but I knew someone might. I just didn't know who. So what happened 10 years ago? I asked. She took a breath. There was a kitchen fire at a test facility in Brooklyn. Elise was doing recipe trials with a group of interns. I was too young to be involved then, but one of the interns, Becca Lamb, was badly injured. She was using a burner that had faulty tubing. There was an explosion. I frowned. I never read anything about it. You wouldn't have, Gillian said. Elise paid for Becca's recovery quietly. The media never picked it up. She claimed she wasn't there that day, even though she was the one who insisted on testing the recipe. Why lie? She had just signed a deal for her second book and was about to launch her TV pilot. A public scandal would have ended it, so she said Becca had gone rogue. The facility director took the fall. Elise walked away clean. And Becca? She moved upstate, never came back to the culinary world. I stood slowly. So someone knows about that, and they're using food to strike back. She got away with it, Gillian said, but someone didn't forget. I nodded and headed for the stairs, dialing Wolfe as I went. He answered with a grunt. Yes, we've got a name. Becca Lamb, former intern, badly injured in a kitchen. Fire. Elise betted it, paid to keep it quiet. Wolfe let out a low sigh. Find her. That led me to a coffee shop in Beacon, 2 hours north of the city, where a woman in her early 30s with burn scars on her left wrist and a suspicious look in her eyes agreed to speak to me for exactly 10 minutes. I don't care about Elise, she said. Not anymore, but someone else might. She looked away. You think I sent that note? I didn't. I wouldn't waste my time. But someone who knows what happened might have. Do you still talk to anyone from the program? She hesitated. Roderick Ames. He was a guest lecturer back then. He wrote a glowing piece about Elise's pioneering methodologies after the fire. I thought it was disgusting. I blinked. He was there that day? Yes. Elise paid him to run interference. He vouched for her. Said she wasn't responsible. And just like that, I had motive number 5. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was already in the office reading something fat and French. He looked up when I came in. Becca Lamb confirmed it. She did. The lie wasn't just lemon zest, it was the whole foundation Elise built her brand on. Wolfe nodded once. Tomorrow, Archie, you will speak with Roderick Ames. Inquire about his conscience. I grinned. And if he doesn't have one? Wolfe closed the book. Then we shall give him one. Roderick Ames didn't strike me as the kind of man who had regular conversations with his conscience, let alone long, remorseful ones. When I caught up with him the next morning, it was in the hushed reading room of the Culinary Historians' Society on the Upper East Side, where every whisper sounded like a scream and every cough brought down judgment from on high. He was seated at a mahogany table, surrounded by books on French sauces and Roman feasts, wearing a cardigan that matched the beige-on-beige tone of the building. When I greeted him, he looked up with the expression of a man caught pouring sugar into a salt. Guilty, but hoping you wouldn't notice. Mr. Goodwin, he said. Again? Again, I said, and sat across from him without asking. Only this time, I'm not here about Zest. I'm here about a fire. That changed his posture. He straightened slightly. His fingers paused on the page of whatever ancient menu he was pretending to read. What fire? The one 10 years ago. Brooklyn. Test kitchen. Elise Varden. Becca Lamb. He blinked twice. Not fast, just long enough that I knew the name still rang in his skull. That was a long time ago, but not forgotten. No, he admitted, quiet as a dropped spoon. Wolfe knows, I said. Elise didn't tell us. Gillian did. Becca confirmed it, and she remembers that you were there. Roderick was silent for a moment. Then he leaned back and rubbed his temples. I was asked to write a piece, he said finally, about culinary risk and innovation. Elise was worried the incident would derail her book deal. I agreed to frame it as a minor technical accident, a cautionary tale about youthful overzeal. Was she there the day of the fire? He hesitated. Yes, so she lied. Publicly. She said she hadn't. instructed Becca directly, that she'd only approve the recipe in theory. She was selective with the truth. I nodded. And you polished the rest. I did, he said flatly. I waited a beat. And now someone is calling her bluff, using food as payback. So, either someone else from that day is making noise, or you're finally finding your scruples. His mouth twitched, but not into a smile. I didn't send that note, Mr. Goodwin, and I didn't swap the lemon, but I do regret my role in protecting her. I stood. Good. Then you'll be happy to repeat that in front of Wolfe. He's assembling the final course. Roderick didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, like a man who knew dessert was coming and that it would be bitter. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was on the phone with Saul Panzer. He finished the call and turned to me. You confirmed it, like a choir boy at confession. He admits he rewrote the truth. Paid or not, he played fixer. Wolfe nodded, and yet he denies taking action now. He looked guilty, but not active. Which leaves, Wolfe said, a silent puppeteer. One who knows the history and is invested enough to act, but distant enough to evade suspicion. I raised an eyebrow. You're thinking, Keen. Wolfe shook his head. He lacks subtlety. And Miss Rilke's anger is too direct. I suspect someone closer, someone who knew Becca, knew the fire, and knows Elise. I got it then. Gillian. Wolfe didn't. Gillian. Wolfe didn't reply, which was how I knew I was right. I opened my mouth to argue, but he stopped me with a glance. Not yet. We require certainty, not instinct. That afternoon, Wolfe made a rare move. He summoned Saul to the brownstone. When Saul arrived, briefcase in hand and expression perfectly unreadable, Wolfe gave him an address and an instruction. Track down Elise's financial records for the weeks after the kitchen fire. Payments, settlements, anything buried under corporate layers or shell accounts. If someone was paid off, Wolfe said, there will be a trace. And if someone paid attention to that trace, they would be armed with leverage. While Saul went hunting through the ledger ghosts, I returned to the bakery. Sophie Rilke was less hostile this time. She offered me coffee and didn't sneer when she poured it. She's unraveling, isn't she? She said, more statement than question. She's rattled, I admitted. Someone's forcing her past to the surface. She deserves it, maybe. But someone's going about it in a way that suggests they want her to feel it first, not just fall. Sophie stirred her own cup. That sounds like Gillian. I blinked. What do you mean? She worshipped Elise, wanted to follow in her footsteps. Then the fire happened, and Elise buried it. Gillian was told to forget it, to lie even. I remember seeing her at the bakery 2 years ago. Said she was looking for something real. Said Elise didn't value truth, only image. You think she's behind the Zest switch? Sophie shrugged. I think she's the only one who still loves Elise enough to want to teach her a lesson instead of ruin her. Back at the brownstone, Saul returned with the numbers, 3 transfers, each routed through shell entities, all ending in a medical trust account opened under the name of Lamb Brooks Foundation. Quiet, small, very clean. Lamb Brooks, Wolfe repeated. Who's Brooks? I flipped open my notes. Becca Lamb's mother's maiden name. Wolfe nodded. Gillian would know that. He rang the bell. When Gillian arrived, cheeks flushed and posture brittle, Wolfe waited until she sat. You were aware of the fire, he said. Yes. You were aware that Becca was paid off quietly. She nodded. Aunt Elise said it was handled, that Becca would be fine. And we shouldn't dwell. And yet you dwelled, Wolfe said. You found the foundation. You saw the transfer pattern. You knew the lie wasn't just about Lemon. It was about legacy. Her lips pressed together. I didn't want to hurt her, she said. I wanted her to face it, Just once, I thought if the food betrayed her, if something as sacred as flavor turned on her, she'd understand what she did. You wrote the note, Wolfe said. Yes. And you replaced the zest. She hesitated. No, she said. I asked someone to. I couldn't do it myself. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Who? She sighed. Sandro, the chef. He was there during the fire, too. He lost his hearing in one ear from the blast. He still works for her because he doesn't want pity. But he hates what she did. Wolfe leaned back, hands folded. Very well, he said. Tomorrow all of you will return, and the truth, whole and seasoned, will be served. I saw Gillian's shoulders sag as she left, and I knew, without needing confirmation, that this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about confession. The next day broke with the kind of tense humidity that made Manhattan feel like a stew left on low heat, thick, slow, and just on the edge of boiling. At the brownstone, Fritz had taken to the kitchen with the grim focus of a man planning to survive a storm through sheer force of culinary pride. He didn't ask questions, but he baked a lemon tart, and we all knew that wasn't an accident. Wolfe remained in his chair all morning, reading a treatise on vinegar production as if no confrontation loomed. But when the grandfather clock in the front hall struck 2, he set the book down and gestured for me to begin assembling our cast. By 3 o'clock, the suspects formerly known as luncheon guests were once again seated in Wolfe's office, arranged like mismatched chess pieces around the rug. Gillian sat near the window, eyes low. Elise sat nearest Wolfe, spine straight, face unreadable. Margot Vance looked impatient, Thurston Lyle mildly amused. Jonas Keene stood near the bookshelves, arms crossed, while Roderick Ames settled in with the grim grace of a man expecting to be publicly spanked. Sophie Rilke leaned back in her chair and folded her arms, radiating disapproval like a scented candle labeled Justified Fury. Wolfe began with no preamble. Someone in this room initiated an act intended not to harm, but to provoke, he said. The lemon zest in the luncheon's main course was altered, not poisoned, but substituted. The note received by Miss Varden was not a prank, it was a message. That message reads, "The lie of the lemon will show its rot in time." He paused, eyes gliding across each face like a searchlight. It has. I now know the rot, the lie, and the reasons. Silence. You could hear the city breathing outside the windows. Elise Varden, Wolfe continued, you were at the scene of a fire 10 years ago, a culinary test kitchen accident that left a young intern, Becca Lamb, permanently injured. You told your staff you were not present. You let another take the blame. You paid a settlement quietly and built your brand on a reimagined truth. Elise said nothing. Wolfe turned his gaze to Gillian. Miss Trask learned the truth. She traced the financial trail, uncovered the settlement trust, and realized that your silence had allowed others to carry your burden, including a man still in your employment. Now Elise's eyes widened. Sandro? Yes, Wolfe said. Your loyal chef. He was. Also there that day. He suffered hearing damage in the blast. You kept him on, paid him well, but never publicly acknowledged what he lost. You pretended it was incidental. Gillian asked him to tamper with the zest. He agreed, not to harm you, but to give you a taste of your own method. Quiet substitution, slight bitterness, confusion followed by doubt. Gillian's voice broke into the silence. I didn't want to hurt you, she said. I wanted you to remember what it felt like to be betrayed by someone who pretended nothing was wrong. Elise turned, her face pale, mouth parting like she was trying to shape a denial and couldn't find the letters. Wolfe spoke before she could. Miss Rilke, your grievance is known, your stolen tart, your phrasing appropriated, but you did not act. You were invited to the luncheon as a witness, not a player. Sophie nodded. Once, tight and brief. Wolfe turned next to Margot. Miss Vance, you suffered reputational damage during the product contamination scandal. You absorbed a fine, lost business opportunities, but you, too, have refrained from action, though your bitterness is vocal. Margot gave a one-shoulder shrug. Bitterness doesn't pay the bills. Mr. Ames, Wolfe said, now glancing at Roderick, you wrote a piece exonerating Elise at the time of the fire. You now admit it was commissioned and misleading. But you did not act beyond that because your guilt had already calcified into resignation. Roderick nodded, miserable. Mr. Keene, Wolfe said lastly, you manage the estate. You saw Gillian in the pantry the day of the luncheon. You chose not to mention it. I suspected, Jonas said quietly, but I thought maybe it was finally her time to say something. And so, Wolfe said, we arrive not at a murder, but a reckoning, not at blood, but at bitterness, and what is left to curdle when truth is left too long in silence. Elise looked around the room, her mouth set in a line I hadn't seen before. Not haughty, not defensive, just tired. I thought I was protecting everyone, she said. The book deal, the staff, the brand. I didn't realize the silence was its own kind of betrayal. That is the lie, Wolfe said quietly. It was not the zest. It was the years of curated omission. I caught Gillian wiping a tear away, though. She tried to pass it off as a scratch to her cheek. Then what happens now? She asked. That, Wolfe said, depends on Miss Varden. Elise inhaled sharply, then exhaled through her nose. I'll make a statement, she said. I'll acknowledge what happened publicly. I won't name Becca, but I'll tell the truth. About the fire, the payout. My role? Margot raised an eyebrow. Why now? Because I should have then, Elise said. And because apparently someone needed to swap out my damn zest to make me remember how sour silence can be. Wolfe gave the faintest of nods, a belated, truth is better than none. The gathering broke up slowly. Gillian lingered at the door, then turned back and looked at Wolfe. Thank you, she said, even if she hates me for it. She won't, Wolfe replied. She may resent you, but she will not hate you, not after today. When the last of them had gone, I shut the door and leaned against it. That, I said, was the quietest riot I've ever witnessed. Wolfe grunted. It was not a riot, it was an education. In what? Confession. In the cost of omission, he said, reaching for the bell cord, and the sharpness of memory. Fritz entered just as Wolfe reached for his napkin. He served the lemon tart. Wolfe took one bite, paused, then said, Fritz, you have redeemed citrus. I grinned. Another case closed with zest and just a hint of justice. The next morning, the brownstone exhaled. That's the only way I can describe it. The pressure that had built up slowly, stealthily, like steam behind the tiles had finally hissed its way out. The office felt lighter. The orchids in the plant rooms were watered with more tenderness than usual, and Fritz's eggs were fluffier than regulation. Wolfe didn't mention the events of the previous day. That was his way. Once a matter was settled, filed, identified, boxed up in one of the drawers of his mind, it no longer existed unless summoned. But me? I still had questions bouncing around like kernels in a hot pan. Around 10 o'clock, I brought in the morning paper, scanned it for anything Wolfe-worthy, and spotted a little blurb buried on page 12. It wasn't an exposé or a headline grabber, just a neatly phrased public statement from Elise Varden, acknowledging a regrettable incident during my early years in food publishing, one which left the talented young intern with lasting harm. She didn't name names, but it was her signature, and it was a start. I dropped the paper in Wolfe's lap and said, "Looks like Elise followed through." He glanced at the page, scanned it, and gave a quiet, satisfied grunt. "Minimalist," he said, "but clear enough." She took the hit. "Late," he replied, "but meaningfully late." I was about to settle into my chair when the doorbell rang. I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not expecting anyone," Wolfe said. I went to answer it. It was Jonas Keene. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, suit pressed, face composed but worn. "I won't take long," he said. I let him in. Wolfe didn't rise, of course, but he did sit a little straighter. "Mr. Keene," he said, "you have further contribution?" Keene nodded and took the edge of the red chair. "I wanted to. Thank you. And to tell you something I didn't say yesterday." I stayed by the door, arms folded. Keene continued. "I was at the kitchen fire too, not just nearby. I was inside. I was the one who pulled Becca out." Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "And?" "Elise never knew. I never told her. At the time, I didn't want credit. I just wanted her to face what happened. But when she didn't, I stayed on. I kept working for her. I told myself it was loyalty. Maybe it was. Or maybe I wanted to be close enough to stop her from lying again." "You were a sentinel," Wolfe said, but silent. "Yes," Keene replied. "And when Gillian started asking questions, I didn't warn Elise. I let it play out. I thought maybe something good would come of it." "And it has," Wolfe said. Keene nodded, rose, and gave a quiet, almost military bow. "Thank you, sir." Wolfe inclined his head. "Go in peace, Mr. Keene." After he left, I turned to Wolfe. "That was a new one." "He is a man who acted," Wolfe said. "Not publicly, but when it mattered." "Still," I said, "this whole thing started with a jar of lemon zest." "No," Wolfe corrected. "It started with guilt. The zest was only the first bitter bite." I let that settle and moved on to paperwork, figuring the day would now return to its usual rhythms: orchids, food, silence. But an hour later, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was Gillian. I opened the door and raised an eyebrow. "You realize this is becoming a habit." She smiled faintly. "Just one more intrusion." She carried a small paper bag, grease-marked and warm. Inside were 2 pastries, lemon brioche buns, still soft, the sugar melting just slightly from the morning heat. She handed them to me. "A peace offering." "Really? He doesn't like outsiders tampering with ingredients." "You're not wrong," I said, accepting them. "He's a territorial chef." She looked past me toward the hall. "Is it all right if I say something to Mr. Wolfe? Just don't propose marriage. He doesn't take surprises before lunch." She laughed softly and stepped in. In the office, Wolfe didn't move, but his eyes flicked toward her. "Miss Trask," he said, "you've made your statement. What remains?" She hesitated, then said, "I wanted to thank you and to apologize." "For tampering with Zest you did not touch?" he asked. "For trying to engineer a reckoning I didn't fully understand." Wolfe studied her. "You acted from loyalty and pain. That is understandable, but not always advisable." "I know." He regarded her a moment longer, then said, "Are you returning to your training?" She looked startled, then nodded. "Yes, I'm applying to a pastry program in Lyon." "Good," he said simply. "Learn with honesty, cook with clarity. The two are not unrelated." She smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe." When she left, Wolfe picked up the brioche, examined it, sniffed it, then tore off a piece and chewed. "Well?" I asked. He swallowed. "She has potential," he said. High praise, I said. Think she'll make it? If she lets the truth rise with the dough, Wolfe replied. Yes, I jotted that one down for the archives. The phone rang shortly after. It was Saul Panzer confirming the last of the wire transfers, every dollar accounted for, every thread leading back to Elise's old LLC. Wolfe barely listened. He was already past the facts. He was in the digestion phase, where ideas, like food, sat heavy until resolved. When I brought him his beer at 5:30 sharp, he took it, sipped, and said without preamble, "Archie, what is it with people and flavor?" I gave it a second. "You mean, why is taste such a loaded thing?" "Yes." "Well," I said, "it's the only sense tied straight to memory. You taste something, and bang, you're back in your mother's kitchen, or at a wedding, or on a bad date," he grunted, emotion disguised as palate. "Pretty much. Dangerous," he said. "Maybe, but also useful. We just solved a whole case with it." He nodded once. "Then dinner will be lemon chicken. Inform Fritz that I require the zest to be genuine." "Fritz doesn't need a reminder." "No," Wolfe agreed, "but I do." I left him there, sipping his beer, staring at the glass as if it, too, held a hidden message. That evening, as the brownstone filled with the fragrant promise of lemon chicken and the kind of soft, companionable silence you can only earn after several days of mild warfare, I thought we were finally coasting into the quiet stretch. Case closed, truth aired, tart served. But Nero Wolfe, being Nero Wolfe, doesn't believe in a clean ending unless every knot has been threaded, tied, and cinched with verbal precision. I was halfway through making a dent in the armchair across from his when he cleared his throat. "There is one thing left, Archie," he said. I set the paper aside. "Only one?" "I'm amazed." He gestured for the case file on the desk. I handed it over. Wolfe flipped through the pages with the soft impatience of a man unimpressed by the world's handwriting. "This," he said, tapping a copy of the anonymous note Elise had received, "was written by Gillian. We know this. The language matches her tone, her intent, and her access," she confessed. "Yes," I said, watching him closely. "And yet," Wolfe continued, "it was not sent by her." That stopped me. "Come again?" "She wrote it," he said, "but she didn't deliver it. She left the original draft in a kitchen drawer at Elise's estate. It was Sandro who copied it, typed it, and placed it on her desk." I blinked. "She didn't know." "No," Wolfe said. "He acted independently, but not impulsively." "How do you know?" He handed me another sheet. It was an envelope. No address, no stamp, just an imprint, faint and precise, on the paper inside Lambrook's Culinary Trust. Saul had dug it up. "He included a letter of his own," Wolfe said. "Unsigned, but unmistakable in tone. A warning, not a threat," he wrote. "We taste what we fail to name. Some bitterness lingers." I sat down again, slower this time. "Okay," I said. "So Sandro was the final nudge. He was the delivery mechanism," Wolfe agreed. "Gillian supplied the sentiment. He supplied the timing." I exhaled. "So now what? Do we tell Elise?" Wolfe lifted his glass of beer and swirled the foam. "No, she's had her truth. Any more would only breed shame. Let her believe her niece acted alone. She will make what peace she can with Gillian. As for Sandro, he has already said all he needed to." I tilted my head. "You're playing the long game." He took a sip. "As always, we let that settle." Outside, the city murmured its evening rhythm sirens in the distance, a car horn, footsteps on the sidewalk. Inside, it was warm and quiet, the kind of quiet that knows it has earned its place. I went to the kitchen to check on Fritz and give him Wolf's last request for the zest. He snorted, unsurprised. "Of course it's genuine," he said, "as if I would serve substitute citrus under this roof." When I returned, Wolfe was making notes in the margin of a monograph on rare Balkan orchids. I didn't interrupt him. We had reached the epilogue portion of the event, where the detective relaxes not because the crime has been punished, but because the damage has been categorized and properly labeled. But before I could make it back to my chair, he said, "Archie, do you know what I found most instructive about this matter? Tell me." He set his pen down. The tampering. The substitution of lemon zest was not a crime of deception. It was a cry for truth, rare and rather elegant. I raised an eyebrow. "You think sabotage can be elegant?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that when the motive is to correct rather than destroy, it approaches something almost culinary." I had to grin. "So justice served with a side of citrus," he grunted. "Don't be vulgar." The rest of the evening passed without incident. Elise didn't call, neither did Gillian. Saul, in an uncharacteristically sentimental mood, dropped off a bottle of limoncello for the archive, and Fritz tucked it away in the cellar without blinking. Even the orchids seemed unusually upright. Around 10, I did one last check on the house, locked the front door, dimmed the lights, and passed Wolfe on the way to my room. He didn't look up from his book, but said, "Archie, yeah? You may file this one under psychological restoration." "Is that a real category?" "It is now." I laughed and went upstairs. As I got into bed, I thought back on the whole thing. A jar of lemon zest swapped, a chef with a scarred ear, a niece with a conscience, a dozen half-truths folded like layers in pastry dough. It wasn't our usual fare. No corpse on a carpet, no blood trail through the foyer, but it had its flavor. And like most things with Wolfe, it was about more than it seemed. People underestimate the quiet cases, the ones where no one dies, but something deep gets dug up anyway, something that changes the way people move through their lives. This was one of those, a lesson in confession, a whisper instead of a scream. And the best part? Wolfe never left his chair. He never does. The week that followed was, by Brownstone standards, almost unnervingly quiet. No more guests. No letters slipped under the door. No missing kitchen ingredients or guilt-laced tartlets. Just the measured tick of the hall clock. Fritz humming lightly over a consommé, and Wolfe happily entrenched among his orchids and the back issues of Gourmet. The case had settled. And in a way I didn't always get to say, it had healed something. Still, closure in Wolfe's world is never just about stopping the train before it hits the station. It's about rerouting the whole track. Which is why, when a sleek envelope arrived addressed to Wolfe in a precise looping script, I didn't just toss it in the usual pile of cookbook solicitations and threats from meat suppliers. I brought it into the office where Wolfe was nursing his beer and making a sound like Latin was personally disappointing him. "From Elise," I said, handing it over. He raised one thick brow, accepted it without ceremony, and opened it with the tip of his index finger. He read, then read again, then handed it to me. "Dear Mr. Wolfe, I wanted to thank you for your involvement, though I realize thank you is far too pale a sentiment for the role you played in correcting the recipe of my life. I have spoken with Gillian. We are taking time apart, but not permanently. There is much to unpeel, and I am no longer afraid of what's underneath. Sandro has asked to retire. I have granted his request with gratitude. He left me a jar of Zest on the kitchen table. The real kind this time. I plan to write again. Not a cookbook. Something else. Perhaps something honest. You were right. The bitterness wasn't in the lemon. With respect, Elise Varden. I whistled under my breath. Well, that's the politest surrender I've seen in a while. Wolfe said nothing, which was its own commentary. He just reached for his beer again. Still, I knew that tone. We weren't quite done. There was something rattling around in Wolfe's brain, some fragment, some hanging thread. "What is it?" I asked finally. He exhaled, leaned back, and spoke as if he were discussing irrigation techniques instead of emotional entanglements. Gillian Trask is intelligent, fiercely loyal, but she is also impulsive and given to sentiment. Her part in this affair, while well-intentioned, was fundamentally errant. "You think she might still act?" "No," Wolfe said. "I think she may still need something." "From Elise? From herself?" I frowned. "You want me to check in?" He gave the tiniest nod. "Discreetly, no questions, no judgments, but I would like to know whether she has resumed her training." I went that afternoon. Gillian's apartment was quieter than before, cleaner too. The books were back on the shelf. The lemon bowl was gone. She smiled when she opened the door, a little wry but not broken. "Mr. Goodwin, you're either here for more brioche or Mr. Wolfe sent you to make sure I haven't fled the country." "Door 3, I said. "He just wants to know if you're all right." She hesitated, then stepped aside to let me in. "I've applied to the Lion program," she said. "They've requested a sample portfolio. I'm working on it." "Good," I said. "And Elise?" "We talked," she said. "She was more human than I expected. She even apologized." "Genuine?" "I think so," Gillian said. "Or as close as she can get. It's a start." I nodded. "You still want to follow in her footsteps?" She shook her head. "No, I want to make my own, but I'll carry some of hers. That's inevitable." She handed me a small white box. "For Fritz, a thank you. Lemon. Macarons. No tricks, I swear." Back at the brownstone, Fritz accepted them like a diplomat receiving a peace offering from a once hostile province. He bit into one, paused, then gave a short, solemn nod. "She'll do fine," he said, disappearing back into the kitchen. When I relayed the update to Wolfe, he seemed pleased, though that meant he blinked a few extra times and didn't grumble when I opened the window a few inches. By Thursday, the case was officially in the rear view. I filed it under culinary deviations, moral. In Wolfe's private index, it sat between a case involving a blackmailing food critic and the time a batch of counterfeit truffle oil nearly derailed a diplomatic dinner. That evening, as we were polishing off a pear galette and I was debating whether to poke Wolfe about his aversion to dessert wine, he surprised me. "You were unusually patient during this case," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "That's either a compliment or a warning." "It's an observation." "Well, I'll take it." Honestly, it felt different. Like we were carving something open instead of shutting something down. Wolfe nodded slowly. "Truth, when buried, ferments. But if allowed air, it can become something useful." "Like wine?" He frowned. "Like vinegar." I laughed. He didn't. We sat for a moment longer, the weight of the week lifting at last. Then he said, "Archie, remind me, what is it you call that gesture people make when they're pretending to be unaffected, but their fingers twitch?" "A tell?"
"Yes."
"The next time you see one, do inform me. It's often more valuable than a confession." I didn't say anything, but I thought about Gillian and Sandro and even Elise, all of them leaving behind little tells.
Zest.
Swapped, phrases borrowed, notes left unsigned. And Wolfe, of course, had read them like footnotes in a philosophy text. The truth had risen, sharp and clear. And this time, for once, nobody had to die for it. 2 weeks later, the last echo of the lemon affair made its way to the brownstone, not through a knock at the door or a suspicious jar or a sobbing confession, but in the form of a box. It arrived just after noon on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier wearing the crisp livery of an upper-tier culinary delivery service. The box was matte black, tied with a gold ribbon, and bore no return address, just a cream-colored tag with Nero Wolfe written in immaculate calligraphy. I brought it into the office where Wolfe, for once, was not reading, but staring, possibly meditating, at the second beer he hadn't yet opened. His eyes flicked to the box, and he frowned. "If that contains lemon preserves, I refuse." "Understandable," I said, setting it on the desk, "but it might be dessert. Also grounds for suspicion." Still, curiosity, however reluctantly cultivated, compelled him to reach for the ribbon and pull it loose. Inside was a single, round cake. Simple, unadorned, the color of toasted honey. No icing, no decoration, save for one fine sliver of candied lemon peel across the top. Beneath it, a card, "Dear Mr. Wolfe, thank you. I hope this is a more honest offering than my last." G.T. Wolfe stared at it. Then, wordlessly, he passed it to me. I lifted the cake, turned it slightly in its box, and caught the scent. Lemon, yes, but mellowed, blended with browned butter and almond. It was confident, no showing off, just real, balanced, and unapologetically itself. "Gillian Trask," I said. Wolfe nodded. "She is. Learning. And thanking you the only way she knows how, by baking her contrition." He didn't sound disapproving. If anything, it had the subtle tone of approval Wolfe reserved for small acts of integrity. I carried the cake into the kitchen where Fritz received it with a blink, sniff, and an exhale that bordered on impressed. "It has potential," he said. "I believe that's the closest he's ever come to praising a non-Fritz pastry," I said when I returned. Wolfe grunted, then went back to his beer, and I sat down feeling once again that strange sense of satisfaction that only came from watching Wolfe resolve something that wasn't about facts alone. It had been about shame and silence, about substitution of ingredients, of truth, and ultimately about what people leave out when they don't want to face what's real. "You know," I said after a moment, "we never did ask Sandro if he regretted doing it." "We didn't need to," Wolfe said. "Why not?" "He cooked for Elise for 10 years, Wolfe replied. "He never stopped. He simply added one bitter note where she would taste it most." I leaned back and considered that. Justice by seasoning. "Poetic," Wolfe said, though I wasn't sure whether he meant my description or the act itself. "And Elise? She has confronted her past. However late, she has spoken aloud what was once silent. That is more than most manage." He closed his eyes, as if that settled it. Hours later, we both tasted the cake. Fritz, ever exacting, sliced 2 pieces and served them with espresso, not because it was necessary, but because the ritual mattered. Wolfe took 1 bite, chewed, and then, very quietly, nodded. "A faultless crumb," he said. "I tried mine. It was good. Really good. Moist, not too sweet. The lemon subtle and well-behaved. No ginger, no baking soda, no bitterness. At least not in the taste." "It's got restraint," I said. "Yes," Wolfe murmured. "She has restrained her impulse to embellish. A necessary step for a pastry chef and a human being. Do we return the favor?" Wolfe shook his head. "No need. The exchange is complete." And that was that. The final page of the affair was written not in confessions or dramatic gestures, but in the quiet resilience of a lemon cake offered without flourish. An apology in flour and zest. Wolfe didn't need her to grovel. He never does. He wanted balance. And she delivered it, ounce for ounce. That night, over dinner, Wolfe was in rare spirits. He spoke twice during the salad course, commented favorably on the roast squab, and even requested a second helping of gratin. He was, by his standards, almost festive. Fritz noticed. I noticed. The orchids probably noticed. And somewhere out there, I imagined Elise Varden leafing through old journals, drafting the truth she'd finally decided to tell, Gillian piping pastry cream in a lion classroom, remembering to measure before she improvised. Sandro watching the sun rise over a new chapter of retirement, one ear still half deaf, but the other attuned to the silence of self-respect. They had all moved forward, not without scars, not without reminders, but forward. As for us, Wolfe remained in his chair. I kept the world running around him, and we waited, as always, for the next knock at the door. Because the thing about lies, even lemon-scented ones, is that they never stay buried. Eventually, someone tastes the difference. By the following Friday, the lemon affair had slipped into the background of Wolfe's life, which is to say, it was placed, labeled, and shelved in the long corridor of solved human tangles he preferred never to revisit. That morning he was inspecting a Paphiopedilum orchid with the kind of reverence usually reserved for sacred relics, and I was doing my best to stay out of Fritz's way while sneaking a bite of leftover terrine. The phone rang just after 11. Wolfe, predictably, didn't answer. I picked it up. Brownstone, Goodwin speaking. The voice on the other end was smooth, practiced, and faintly theatrical. Elise Varden. "I just wanted to say it's done," she said. "The article will publish next week. A proper one. Honest, not sanitized." I named no names but included every fact. "Well," I said, "Wolfe will appreciate that you got your seasoning right this time." A chuckle. He was right about bitterness. It lingers longer than sweetness ever does. After I hung up, I relayed it to Wolfe, who gave the tiniest nod and turned a page in his monograph on hybridization techniques. That evening, after a dinner of duck confit and an unusually chatty Fritz, I found Wolfe in the office again, sipping beer and indulging in what passed for reflection. I took the opposite chair and, after a moment, said, "You didn't get your dramatic reveal this time. No explosive climax, just a note, a cake, and some slow thawing guilt." He grunted. "Dramatics are for the guilty who wish to be caught." This was a case of conscience, less theater, more fermentation. "Still," I said, "the manipulation of ingredients to force a reckoning? That was clever, a little rogue for your taste." "It was calculated," he replied, "and mild, neither fatal nor flamboyant, precisely the kind of pressure needed to restore equilibrium." I considered that. "So Gillian wins." "No one wins," he said, "but a few have stopped losing." He drained the rest of his beer, set the glass down, and reached for a book. "That's the end, then?" "Yes." I stood. "Until someone else decides truth needs a garnish." "Or a disguise," Wolfe said dryly. And with that, he returned to his reading. The room settled into its usual stillness, with the faint clink of silverware being washed in the kitchen and the ticking of the old clock anchoring us in familiar time. Upstairs, in my room, I thought once more about Gillian, about how she had turned a culinary prank into a philosophical assault, how Sandro had kept his silence until the right moment, and how Elise, faced with the taste of her own obfuscation, had finally said something real. It wasn't a murder case. There was no blood, no final scream, no clever concealment of weapon or motive. Just the slow, sour unveiling of what people do when they pretend their mistakes have no flavor. But in the brownstone, justice doesn't always arrive with handcuffs. Sometimes it's served cold with a twist of lemon.